The iPhone 17 Pro Max is fantastic, truly. Even as an Android user, I didn't really feel the need to switch off, and up until only very recently, this is the phone that I'd been dailying since it launched. Apple did a lot here that really made what felt like a fashion statement into something that actually brought real, powerful utility. And I don't mean that lightly. We had this aluminum unibody frame, which was a huge step back from titanium for durability, but it improved the cooling performance alongside the new vapor chamber, which means that overheating really isn't a concern. And if you're someone that likes to play a lot of games or edit photos on your phone, this meant that thermal throttling really isn't that big of an issue anymore. Also, the new selfie camera, whether you think this is a gimmick or not, is actually amazing, letting you shoot horizontal photo and video while still being centered to the camera. And speaking of camera performance, Apple now also lets you shoot raw video on the 17 Pro Max. This phone is basically a content creator's dream. It's one of the best gaming phones that you can buy, and overall, Apple's iOS is pretty optimized, especially when it comes to the applications in the App Store. So why did I stop using it? Well, before we go further, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here. We're almost at 80,000 subscribers, which we might even cross by next week, which is crazy. Now, I do just want to say we are about 20,000 away from 100K, which means that we get to put a plaque on that wall behind me. So if you want to be a part of the group of people who did that and made it happen, I would really appreciate it. But if not, I hope you at least enjoy this video. Okay, look. I want to be really clear and say that I actually really enjoyed my time using the iPhone 17 Pro Max. However, there's some things that popped up over time that initially weren't as big of a concern, like the aluminum chassis, for example. So I conducted a little bit of an experiment. I don't use my phone's caseless or without a screen protector, and this time I decided to because there was a lot of noise around whether or not this thing would hold up. I also am just a firm believer that these durability tests don't tell the day-to-day story, and I wanted to see for myself whether or not this thing would last me. I won't lie to you, I made a really big mistake. My entire frame is full of chips and scratches, and there's even two corners that, I don't know how well this is going to pick up on camera, are completely bent out of shape. The display, which is also something that I'd heard was insanely scratch resistant, is also now covered in some pretty deep gashes, and I have no recollection of how they'd gotten there. I will say that I don't have any micro scratches, which is a good thing. It shows that this display is actually harder than the last generation of iPhone, but even though I didn't really want to admit this, I think all of this was pretty expected just because aluminum is much weaker than titanium. For 99% of people who are buying this phone, you're going to be using a case, and this is something that's going to be completely avoided when using a case. Speaking of cases though, I don't want you to make the same mistake that I did, even if you have the much uglier version of the iPhone, the cosmic orange one. Bruh. So I partnered with Dbrand. They actually just announced their color match ghost case, which is a perfect fit even if you followed the herd and got the orange one. How dare you? Jokes aside though, this is a very good protective case that still lets your questionable choices be shown around to everyone. It has solid raised bumpers, it comes in both deep blue and cosmic orange, and what I like is that Dbrand has a zero yellowing guarantee where they promise a free replacement on the chance that it does, but it won't. I would also check out their Prism 2.0 screen protector. It's basically idiot proof. You literally just plop it on and you pull from the pull tab and you have a perfect installation. So you won't end up with a battered iPhone like mine. I have purchased and have been using Dbrand skins and accessories for ages now, and they hold up really well. I'm really happy that I get to work with Dbrand now because I actually stand by their products personally, since I am someone that was a customer and really enjoyed them before actually working with them. I even used their skin on my Fold 7 and their Prism screen protector, and they just hold up really well. So if you want to learn more about the Ghost Match color case and the Prism 2.0 screen protector, I will drop links in this video's description if you're curious, and thank you Dbrand for sponsoring this video. Now, when it comes to the iPhone 17 Pro Max, I want to be brutally honest here because this is one of the most painless devices that I've used. I've heard a lot of noise around iOS 26 with some bugs here and there, and I've even had some buddies that have complained about it endlessly, but I haven't experienced that. If anything, when it comes to the apps that I use on a daily basis, whether that's the camera app, something like Instagram, or even BlueLink, which is the application that I use to remote start my car, it honestly just works better on here. Whereas on Android, despite loving the platform as a whole, it's not as forgiving. I've had issues with that exact same BlueLink app countless times on Android, and for something that I rely on pretty much every day, especially since I use my phone as a digital key, it's a lot less worrisome when I'm using it it on the iPhone. And not to beat a dead horse here, but I found that when I used the iPhone, I took more photos and documented things more often because it was just a camera system that I could ultimately trust more. Sure, you could go on about how technically there's better and that the iPhone is basically behind in a lot of ways. It still is, but pointing and shooting on the iPhone gives you such a clean result, and I mean that in more ways than one, especially with the noise. Even in dark environments, it holds up a lot better than a ton of devices, especially my Z Fold 7. And I won't even get started on how much better the iPhone looks in social media applications when it comes to its camera, because I don't want to drag this out. But as someone who actually uses these devices, it can be hard sometimes to steer myself away from the iPhone when I start to feel like I'm being locked in. I did, however, fall into the trap of thinking that something like Apple's RAW video was going to be very beneficial to me and that I'd use it all the time. I haven't used it once. Yeah. I also think that internally, I felt like the new vapor chamber and the aluminum chassis was going to be a much bigger deal than it is on a day-to-day basis. But let's be real here, I'm not playing like Elden Ring on my iPhone. I mean, I wish I was, and I wish that I could because that would be really sick, but there isn't a real legitimate use case that I found that has made this a real impact on my day-to-day performance, aside from just testing it and pushing it to its limits. And about RAW video on the iPhone, it's super convenient. It's something that I thought would be a real game changer for me personally, since I do make content for a living. The thing is though, is that I feel a lot more confident with using a professional camera. And I also want to be able to free up my phone for other things if I am filming. So in a lot of cases where the iPhone probably would have been a really good option for me to use, I've almost always defaulted to just using an actual camera. I also, even though it's kind of hard to tell these days because their RAW video implementation is so good, I wouldn't really ever choose to use the iPhone on content that I'm doing professionally if it involves like brand work or a big trip that I just want to be able to get the best quality out of. Though there's actually a handful of things with the iPhone that I found just work here. I used to have a lot of issues with cell reception on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, on the 15 Pro Max, and pretty much every iPhone before that. But I don't even recall a single time where I've had an issue with the iPhone 17 Pro Max dropping calls in any way. I'm not sure if this is because of a new modem or like the antenna location or maybe both, though I found things like Wi-Fi to be more consistent. It doesn't drop out at all. Cellular data has also been much more reliable, which is very important to consider when you're shopping for a phone. And the 17 Pro Max has also had a jump to 12 gigs of RAM. And honestly, when it comes to a phone, especially an iPhone, I would say that RAM was pretty redundant, but I do notice that apps don't really have to refresh when they're suspended. Starting up apps is insanely quick, especially games, and the overall stability is just much better. I wish I could say that this RAM brings a real benefit to something like Siri with Apple's implementation of Apple Intelligence, but that thing is absolute trash. And funnily enough, I didn't really expect this to be a nitpick of mine with the iPhone, but it's something that I've kind of grown to not necessarily rely on, but really appreciate. I really like using Google Gemini. I can go live with it, I can have a natural conversation with it, and I could basically use it to do pretty much anything now, let's be real. Not that I suggest using AI as a crutch for literally anything, because it's almost always inaccurate when you need really important information, but it can be really helpful to give you detailed answers on something that you just need quickly that isn't going to be like a make or break scenario. All I have to do on the Fold 7 to activate this Gemini is just hold that power button, and it's just a really powerful tool to have in my pocket. Now, Apple's implementation, if it works, is horrible at best. It always hangs, it doesn't give you an answer sometimes, it tells you it can't do things, and then it tries to default to ChatGPT, which takes absolute ages. Thankfully though, it does look like Apple is actually going to be defaulting to Gemini hopefully soon when it comes to Apple Intelligence, which is great because I feel like 80% of what they've announced hasn't actually been brought to this phone at all, and the whole thing was just very overhyped with iOS 18. And I will say that even though I personally dislike 90% of what AI is being used for, there is a very real advantage that it gives to people who might need the extra accessibility features, and there's no reason that we couldn't ask to have more on a device, or at least get what we were promised. However, something that I didn't expect with the 17 Pro Max was for Apple to put in a larger battery. This time it's a 5088 milliamp hour cell, which albeit isn't insanely large for today's standards, it's pretty normal, but it's a massive improvement with what we were coming from. And they also now brought in the fastest charging on an iPhone, which is like up to 40 watts or something. I know it could sound like I'm making jabs. I kinda am, because on paper, it's not like this is mind-blowing, but in my hands, I've not had a battery perform better than this iPhone. Like, it's actually insane. I cannot kill this phone. Even during CES, I had a really hard time, and that was while I was using location sharing to track down some friends, I was taking photos and videos, and I was using GPS to get around, making phone calls, and absolutely obliterating my social media feed. I was also roaming since I'm from Canada and I was on an American network, and I didn't use Wi-Fi at all. I would literally leave the hotel from like 7:30 to 8 o'clock in the morning and be back around midnight, and I'd still have about 40% left, which is kind of crazy for how much I was actually doing. One thing that makes this a lot more impressive to me though is, yeah, it's not like the charging speed is at Mach 10, but it's very fast for an iPhone. And now 20 minutes in my car, I could get through the entire day. I don't even charge this thing at nighttime when I use it. I haven't done that a single time, and I only do it when I'm on a trip, which is funny because it's now a behavior that I've had to relearn with the Fold 7 because this battery isn't nearly as good as the iPhones, nor does it even charge as fast, which is kind of crazy. But you're probably thinking, okay, this whole video is me absolutely glazing the iPhone. Why would I even bother to switch back? Well, the iPhone does fit into my ecosystem. I use a Mac to edit all of these videos, and I even benefit a lot from the iPhone, especially with AirDrop, which makes posting short form videos so much easier. The thing is though, with Apple, and there's no shame in admitting this, but when it comes to the iPhone, it feels a little complacent. It locks me out of the freedom that I have to use other devices, or at least it makes it a little more challenging. I am also using the Google suite of services because it's the easiest to access from any device, and I just don't want to have to worry about an additional layer being iCloud. And I also love the utility that something like the Z Fold 7 brings me, which although isn't a perfect solution, it still outweighs the negatives to me dropping the iPhone. In fact, I actually just made a video last week where I talk about the Z Fold 7 and why I switched to it after 6 months later. So if you want to learn more about why I made that decision, I'll put that video in the description down below. But as someone that just has a fascination with tech, I get a lot more excited about devices that may be a little quirky and a lot more fun to use on the daily. Thankfully though, it looks like we're actually getting this with the iPhone Fold, which could genuinely be the best implementation of a folding phone that we've had in North America. And unironically, it's the device that I'm most excited for, especially seeing as how good of a job Apple did with the 17 Pro Max. So don't take this video as a hate video by any means on the iPhone. In fact, I actually really loved using it. If you go back and watch the reviews that I made on this phone, they were very positive when, you know, in the last few years, I've found it really hard to have a positive spin on an iPhone in these types of videos. I think that Apple actually killed it, and I'm really looking forward to what's on the horizon. Anyways though, if you like this video, a like and a sub goes a very long way to help support me on this channel. And if you've made it all the way through, consider dropping like a duck emoji or something so I know who the real ones are. And I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.